Hey, everybody. I am super excited to be here. My name is Bill Wilson. I'm from Pace Pricing. We'll get into that in a minute. But I want to talk about pricing today. And specifically, I want to talk about um, some of the anxiety that comes up around pricing. And so I've talked to a ton of founders, and this is by far the biggest things that come up. When we talk about changing our pricing or making any kind of change to pricing at all, we get a little bit scared. And we get scared because we're worried that our customers are going to churn. We're worried that our competitors are going to come in and use it as an advantage to like swoop in and try and steal our prospects or customers. And we're worried that it might slow down acquisition because it's a pretty big change. We're tinkering with the commercial relationship between us and our customer. And so founders generally feel stuck here. This is why, procrastination is the lack of clarity, right? So if a founder feels stuck, we're not really going to change any of our pricing. We're going to sit in that state for a long time, which just makes it worse and worse and worse. So today I want to talk a little bit about that and how we can overcome it. So the way forward, what if instead of anxiety, pricing gave us confidence? What if it was a really good lever that we could use in our business over and over and over again in such a way that it allowed us to compete really well, allowed us to respond to market changes without all of that anxiety? Um, it kind of starts at the beginning, and that's what I'm going to talk to you a bit about today, which is this idea that if you can identify the right value metric, um, a lot of other things in pricing become a lot simpler. And the reason it is because value metrics are super important to your customer and they're super important to how you grow. So let's get into it a little bit. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to dig into the how to identify the value metrics that matter. And I've got a couple of tools here for you that you can use. We're going to talk about how to then align the pricing with the delivered value that we have for our customers, and then how to raise prices without churn, or basically how to raise prices without pissing off our customers. Cool. All right. So who the hell am I? My name is Bill Wilson. I am the founder and CEO of Pace Pricing. I've helped B2B SaaS founders, about 400 of them now. We've generated about 100 million in new revenue for those companies. And I'm a founder myself. And I've spent all of my time since my last company just focused on helping B2B SaaS companies nail their pricing through data-driven strategies. So that's what we're going to dig into is value metrics, and that's who I am. All right. First thing you have to do when you think about value metrics is understand what a value metric is. So a value metric is a countable measure of value delivered at key steps along the customer journey.
Hey, Bill,
So,
real quick,
yo.
if you're sharing something, we can't see it.
Oh, man.
Okay, cool.
How's
That
that?
was telling me you were sharing something. Perfect.
Man, we missed all the fun slides. All right, cool. Sorry, guys. All right, where were we? Right, listing all the possible value metrics. So the first thing we have to do is really map out our customer journey. And that means from the very, very beginning when they join our software all the way to the end, what do they actually do to get to value? So every step they take, whether it's signing up, creating something, maybe it's project management software, they have to create a project and then they have to add tasks and then build a Gantt chart and then they invite people and, all those types of things. So just map out everything in your product, how the customer gets to value. And then what we want to do is we want at each stage of the customer journey is just ask ourselves, what can I count here? What are the things that I can count? What are the measurable moments that I can count? And I encourage you not to filter yourself at this stage. Do not just go, well, I can't charge for that or I can't charge for that. It's not about that. It's just about listing them all. And so don't edit yourself. It's like writing. Just don't edit yourself. Just keep writing and then come back later and edit. All right. So here's what one of these things looks like. I've got a Miro board for you I can share, but this is what it looks like. So this is for a proposal creation SaaS. This was actually a client of ours. And you can see this is a simplified customer journey here, but they have a trial sign up. They've got to create a proposal. They've got to collaborate on that proposal with their colleagues. They then send the proposal and so on and so on and so on. And so at each step of the way here, we sort of measured the different things that we think we could count. Now, at the trial sign-up stage, we can count the number of users. I've got a little error here. And then at the create a proposal stage, we can say maybe it's the number of templates or the number of proposals that they actually create. And then when they're collaborating with people, maybe it's the number of collaborators that they're actually collaborating with, and so on and so on. So you kind of get the point. So once we have all of these things, like we sort of listed out all the possible value metrics that we could use, how the heck do we figure it out from here? So the next thing we have to do is look at it through a couple of lenses to understand which ones are going to make good value metrics. And so the two dimensions I like to look at this are one for the B2B SaaS company itself, which would be operational ease. So it's like we need to figure out if it's trackable, can we bill for it, and does it scale with our business? So an example of an unscalable one would be, say, you sell to factories, right? And you decide to pick a value metric, which is number of locations. Well, chances are adding a new factory to a company is probably a pretty big deal, and it probably doesn't happen very often. So you're probably not going to be able to scale with that very well. The other thing would be customer clarity. So this is really about that value connection. How well does the customer associate the metric with value that they get? And so a couple of keys to that, it's got to feel fair and familiar as well. So it's got to be either something they're already measuring in their business, or it's something that feels fair to charge for. And above all else, it has to be predictable. So customers need to be able to predict their spend with your software. And this is probably one of the biggest things in pricing, is that predictability, because people want to have certainty about what they're going to be paying over time, or at least, within a range. Cool. Okay. So here's what one of those things looks like. I've got a thing called the HOPE framework that I will share with you. It is a framework for scoring these things, and it's a Google sheet that I'll share with everybody at the end. But you can see here I've mapped out the proposal creation ones, and we've sort of categorized them all. So we have a few that are sitting down in the edge section, and we've got a couple, like 4 or 5, that are sitting in the optimal side. Okay, so some that are poking to the top are like active users and collaborators and things like that. So now we have all of these metrics. Which ones do we need to focus on? So the way I look at the metrics, the way I look at the HOPE framework, is that the metrics that are on the left are super important to think about, because the customer really gets it. So the upper left-hand quadrant, I call these the hard value metrics. So these are high clarity, but they're not easy for us. So our job over time is probably to improve the feasibility of using those metrics for pricing. So that's the first thing I look at, is hard. So it gives the product team something to work on. And then on the right-hand side, we got optimal metrics. So these ones are like the high clarity, super easy for us. These are the ones that make that they're ideal for pricing. And then edge metrics, which I won't go into too much, but if we get value metrics that are starting to creep up on the value scale, and on the E scale, but they're not quite over that line into the optimal range, they could be used for other things, potentially limits on plans to help people move between plans. It could be used in that way. We call secondary metric. And then, of course, in the bottom left, we've got trash land, right? Low clarity, low ease, just ignore them. They're no good. All right, so now we have like 4 or 5 metrics sitting up on optimal. What do we do next? So the next thing we need to do is actually go validate this with our customers. This is the number one way to make sure that your value metric is right, or at least optimal. So either get on a phone call with them, talk about product value, use the opportunity from your product teams to actually dig into this. And one of the questions you need to ask them is, we're thinking about changing the way we structure our pricing. And these are the various ways that we think we can charge. And you can list them all out, and then just have a conversation with your customer about them and see how they feel about them. The other way, which is sometimes a lot more fun and a lot more data driven, is to create a product value survey, where, among other things, you're asking about what features are important and what they value most and what they would want to change. But then we can slide in a question about these pricing metrics and see which ones they think make the most sense for them. Customers want us to win, right? And they want to be treated fairly. So this is in their best interest to do. And every time we run one of these, we always get amazing responses. And sometimes we get surprises about which ones the customers actually prefer. So this is the ultimate way to validate your value metric. So just to recap, here's where we are. So we've listed all of the steps in the customer journey. We figured out all the different things that we can count. We've now scored them and to figure out which ones could be optimal pricing metrics. And we've talked to our customers to figure out which one works the best. And so once we have that, a lot of other things are going to become much easier now because things will be much easier to explain and things will be much easier to package around. So that's the next step, is we need to really dig into our packaging and figure out how to build packages around this value metric. And so there's 2 key things I want to talk about. One, the idea of this value metric should be that the more your customer uses, the more they pay in whatever form that happens to be. It doesn't have to be continuous for every single one that they use. They get charged. It could be in different ways, but that's one way. So that gives us that intra package expansion. So if they're sitting in the good plan and they use a whole bunch of whatever this countable metric is, they end up paying a little more. We also want to make sure that our packages are aligned with the customer's job to be done. And this is the second big unlock in pricing, as far as I'm concerned, is that our customers are out there trying to solve a problem. And we often talk about this as like, hey, find a problem customers are trying to solve and build software to solve it. I would take it a step further and say, find a problem customers are trying to solve that they're willing to pay money for. And oftentimes that can be described using the job to be done framework because it's agnostic of technology. So if your customer were to solve this problem on their own, how would they do it? Would they hire someone to do it? If they were going to hire someone to do it, what does that job description look like? And so that's how I look at it. Because once you figure out what that core job to be done is, then you can look at your features in your software and go, cool, which ones of these can I package together to solve that one core job to be done? Just the minimal set. And that's usually your first package. And the reason I bring this up is because a lot of people will sit and they'll go, everything ends up in the better package. And then they try and build a trimmed down version for the good package, which may or may not meet needs. And then they try and contrive something for the best package for their enterprise customers. I think there's a better way to do it, which will feel a lot better and cause a lot less frustration in your internal teams, and that's using jobs to be done. Cool. Okay, so now we've got packages that are lined up around our value. We've built a new model. We've done lots of analysis. Now it's time to communicate this. Communication is incredibly important when you're making any kind of pricing change, whether it's on your website, specifically on your pricing page for sure. In sales conversations, it's incredibly important for people to really understand the new model and be able to communicate it to customers. In fact, it's a bit of a tell if you start talking to the sales teams about the new pricing and how it works, if they don't grasp it right away. Because if they don't grasp it right away, they're not going to be able to communicate it to the customers, and therefore the customers aren't going to be able to get it. So this is a really, really important step. We also need to make sure that we're highlighting all the areas of the model. So the fairness and predictability side of it, we need to be looking at how it scales and talking to our customers about that. And these are some key areas where you can do it. So scalability is kind of in that onboarding and customer success check-ins or quarterly business reviews. And of course, the fairness and predictability should be permeating every conversation, but also really highlighted on the pricing page. So I know that that's kind of a light version of the communication, but that's generally the big things you need to think about. And then finally, we need to plan the plan, right? So we need to figure out how we're going to roll this thing out. And a lot of founders and teams will create a new model like this and then put up a new pricing page and have new customers come in the door, and that's it. They don't ever think about their existing customers. Or if they do, they're just like, that's way too hard. We're just going to grandfather everybody in. And I would argue this is where your 3x growth comes from. Like, this is how you do it. Take your existing customers and you need to move them to the new model. There are so many reasons for this. The longer you leave them there and their special deals, or not paying enough or no price increases at all, the more and more it's going to cost you over time in operational efficiency and just margin and, your ability to generate revenue and enterprise value. So to do that, there's a lot to this, but in a quick version is you need to segment your existing customers by the impact that the pricing model is going to have on them. So specifically, I'd be looking at how long they've been a customer and how big of a percentage the impact is. That's probably the basics. And then I would split them up based on that impact. So rule of thumb, anybody who's getting a 10 to 20% price increase or lower, you can probably handle in one group with an email explaining what's happening. I do have a email communication template if you'd like it. That talks about all the different things you should include. But that's generally how you do it. So break it up in 10 to 20% group, and then 20 to 50%, and then anybody over 50%. And then for your really large accounts, you're going to want to handle those one-on-one. So whoever the sales rep is, or the account executive, or the customer success person, they're going to have to get on the call, and they're actually going to have to talk to that large account and talk about the actual changes and what it means for them, and then figure out how to move forward. So that's the fastest way the fastest way I've ever explained how to build an entirely new pricing model. But once it's out there, you now need to refine as you go. So track retention, acquisition, expansion. Retention should be going up, acquisition hopefully is going up, and expansion definitely should be going up. We want to get to a place where our net revenue retention is well over 100%, because that's how you'll blow through your growth ceiling. Get customer feedback continuously, feed it back into the product teams, and adjust and align as you grow. The reason that you do this loop, and because it really is a loop, you just keep going around and around in this, is because every time you think about a new product feature, you need to be thinking about monetization. Every time you decide to create something new or a customer comes up with something, one of the lenses you have to look at it through early on is, how are we going to monetize this? How are we going to capture value for it? So that could be that it goes into a plan. It could be that it is charged as an add-on. It could be introducing a new value metric. There's lots of different ways, but if you don't think about it early enough, it's not going to make it through, because if you think about pricing at the end, you're stuck with how it's been built and you have to try and figure out how it fits in later, which is never fun. All right. I hope that was helpful. It was very quick, but I've got something for you. I have a pricing strategy review, which is a thing that I do. It's an hour-long call. You send me some data ahead of time, basically around your competitors and your current metrics. I do some research and we get on a call and I try and give you as much value as I possibly can. And we cover things like capturing value, packaging, and best practices. At the end of it, you'll get a deck. If you have a pricing page, you'll get one of my pricing page teardowns, and you'll get a recording. So I typically offer these for $1,500 each, but for our live class today, I want to give the first 3 companies that sign up here one of these pricing strategy reviews. So please go ahead and grab the link, hit the QR code, however you want to do it, and fill out the form, and let's get on a call and chat about pricing. Cool? All right.
Awesome. This was fantastic. Thanks. Thanks so much for going through all of that. I'm going to post the link to your QR code thing here too, so that people have that. And then I had a question to kick us off here. So if you have a question, please type it in the chat. We're going to start going through them here in a minute. But I had a question for you while I was listening to that.
Sure.
You mentioned how important it is to have predictability in your pricing. I'm curious, how does somebody who has a usage-based pricing able to give their customer some kind of predictability, or are you just totally against usage-based pricing?
Oh, I love usage-based pricing. Okay. I think it's super important. In fact, I think the way that we should be pricing in 2024 and beyond is a hybrid model of feature differentiation and usage-based. I think that's the only way to win. So how can you build predictability into a usage-based model? It's a really great question. So there's a couple of different ways you can do it. The way I like to do it, of course, unsurprisingly, is with data. I like to look at our existing customers. So once we figure out what this, the thing is that the usage-based thing is, we want to be able to go in and monitor how much of it's being used today, right? So we want to go and just look at how much are people using and just sort of look at what is in common across those groups. So, hey, look, everybody in the good package is using about 50 of these things. Everybody in the best is using like 100, 150, some kind of correlation. You do that. And then generally what you want to do is you want to set the limits on your plans to be around 60% if you really want people to be paying a lot more each time, which is kind of gets away from a bit of that predictability, but cover 80% of the use case all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So that gets you a bit more predictable. And then those people who are really using a lot are going to pay more. Now, how do you control that piece? Well, like a continuous value metric is like every time you use one, you get charged for it, right? So think about every time I add a user, I get prorated cost for a per user price. But what you could do is you could bucket it. So as people tip over into the next, like they use more, there's just basically for the next 1,000 of those, it's this flat fee. Mm-hmm. So that's highly predictable, and it just gets it a bit more granular. You have to be careful though, because you don't want it to feel like, well, I just need 10 more. I don't need 1,000. So you need to really make sure that the buckets are scaled according to the type of metric it is.
Right.
So if it's gigabytes of space in a storage software, yeah, it's probably a pretty wide band. Mm-hmm. But if it's like the number of factories, like I was talking about before, it's probably a very, very small band. So yeah.
I almost imagine there's a reverse bell curve. We're going to get to Ramesh's question in a minute, but I almost imagine there's a reverse bell curve of like how much they care. Earlier stage businesses, like smaller companies, probably care quite a bit if there's overages and they're not they're not accounting for it too much. Then you probably get to this like bottom of the curve where they don't care nearly as much because they have revenue, things are going well, they're not doing such an insane amount of volume where a little bit of overage across a lot of people will create a huge pricing spike, which it would the larger the company is. So it's probably like in that middle, like if you target companies that are in the middle, it's probably maybe not as impactful.
Yeah, and it's not. And the other thing you can do too is in those sales conversations, this is a really great way for you to demonstrate you understand your customer. As you can talk to them about the thing and help them predict what they're going to use. And it's going to go as like, well, I work with a lot of companies your size, and this is what the typical usage looks like.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So you can back them into the right tier for them, because the last thing anybody wants is a surprise.
Right.
I used to work with a company that did e-commerce, and when we onboarded a new customer, we would check with them about what their gross merchandise volume was, because that's how we controlled how much they paid. And they would always underestimate this or overestimate, just depending on where they were at. And so what we did was we might monitor for 90 days and then come back and then lock it in. And so that's another way you can help with the predictability, especially if you're on a larger scale. It's like, we have no idea how many of these things we're going to use. This is AI models. We've never created AI models before. We're going to try it out. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, so you just set it up, let them go for 90 days, monitor it, and then lock in based on that.
Love it. All right. Well, Ramesh has a question here. And real quick, just in case you didn't see me post this, I posted a link to a survey. If y'all could do the survey, that'd be super helpful. It gives us like what topics we should be covering. Also gives us feedback on what things you feel like we could improve for these live classes that make them even better. But okay, Ramesh had a good question here, which is thanks for the insights. How do you think about 2 tiers of value metrics, where the first tier is tied to your enterprise customers? For him, it's third-party administrators. But the second tier is more about the value your customers deliver to their customers, so self-funded employers.
Right. Yeah. So I guess without going into those specific 2 types, the way I think about having 2 tiers is fine, because sometimes you need to have the 2 vectors to protect. So I'll give you an example, and maybe this will help Ramesh. Also, I'm glad you're here, man. Good to see you. If you think about having 2 different value metrics, sometimes you need to do it to be able to service the right size of customer. So I see a lot of times where you'll get into these good, better, best plans where they have, this plan has up to 5 of these, and then the next plan's up to 20 users, and the next plan's up to 50 users, but it also comes with a heap of features. Right? It's like, well, I have 50 users, but I don't need all these features. Why do I have to go to this other plan? You'll hear that kind of conversation a lot. So sometimes it's more about meeting the customer where they are. So maybe it's like number of users and usage on another element. So that's an example of a 2-tier one, which is, I think, is pretty similar to what Ramesh is asking. It's like administrative users and then versus the value they actually deliver. Yeah. So I think they work together. You have to decide which one is your primary value metric, though. So my guess is if your customers are successful, Ramesh, the more value they can deliver to their customers. And so therefore, I'd probably lean on that one as being my more core value metric, and the other one a necessary piece, because those are the people that are having to do the work and dig in and, if I understand the problem correctly. But yeah, that's how I think about it. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that was great. And if Ramesh has a follow-up there, he'll ask it. All right, we have Samantha here. She asks, do you have any recommended tools or strategies for tracking churn versus profitability after a price increase? Specifically, we're looking for alternatives to complex Google Sheets setup.
Right. Yeah, if you use any kind of profit well metrics or any of those types of things, I would definitely start tracking. If you don't have something like Gainsight or Amplitude or Pendo or Mixpanel, one of those types of things installed, I would definitely get that in so you can monitor usage. But in terms of afterwards, I would make sure you're measuring all those metrics ahead of time, and really you're just looking for baseline comparisons. So whatever tool you're using, that's it. I mean, it doesn't need to be rocket science. You just need to measure against before and after. I like doing 30 days before I get too worked up about something, and just comparing against the last 30 days just to get the cycle going. So, if you see, for example, if you do a pricing change and you start seeing things like churn doubling, for example, in that month, then there's probably some changes that need to be made. But generally what we see is that the churn numbers stay pretty steady. But I understand the idea about not wanting to use complex spreadsheets. My best advice would be to, if you're using a CRM, to pull it into a dashboard from there, if you're tracking everything in the CRM, and then just build yourself a dashboard similar to what you would do for sales performance is probably what I would do.
I find that's a really good point. I find that often you're a couple of custom fields away from the CRM being able to track something really well. So like, for example, sometimes what we'll do is we'll create a custom field that timestamps when a particular action is taking. And based on that timestamp data, we're able to run reports that normally you wouldn't be able to run. But since we timestamped when a meeting was booked or when a meeting was marked complete, now we can run all of these other reports that tell us how many kind of meeting completes do we need in order to close a deal, or things that are a little bit harder to track sometimes. So anyway, that's always a good piece of feedback, is add a custom field or two in the CRM and think beyond just user input fields, and you could do more timestamps and check boxes. There's a lot of other types of fields you could do. Absolutely. All right, another question from Samantha here. One challenge we faced is pricing ourselves out of our original client base after a price increase. You mentioned the importance of attracting the right size of customer. Do you have any specific strategies or insights on how to make that transition effectively?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. And it comes down to this idea that, where you start, or the customers that got you here may not be the customers that get you to your next level. Mm-hmm. And so, once you narrow in on who you best serve, sometimes there's some natural attrition that happens with those early customers because they're no longer a best fit for you. And I think it's just honestly sometimes better to acknowledge that and maybe let the attrition happen so that you can focus on the customers that are really going to drive the value for you. It's not that you don't care about those customers, it's just that they no longer fit. And I'm saying that insofar as if that's the decision that you've made, right? If the decision that you've made is to raise prices and you still want to service those customers and now those customers are having a really hard time, that's different. There's probably ways for you I would revisit that and just have a look at, especially if you're using any kind of value metrics, things like maybe there's reduced limits, maybe there's find out what it is that's causing the friction and see if there's a way that you can meet them where they are. And that's one thing I always say about pricing. It's just that we've got to be able to meet our ideal customers where they are, and wherever that happens to be. If they're huge, small, or they're really sophisticated or unsophisticated, we need to be able to meet them where they are. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but if it's no longer your target ICP, sometimes the natural attrition is going to happen. If you really want to keep them, you could grandfather them, but I'm really against grandfathering them into old pricing. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that was great. All right. Alexa had a question here. In your experience for B2B SaaS in a very commoditized space, what is the best communication rollout for a price increase to the existing customer base?
Right. Yeah, this is a good question. So highly commoditized, basically meaning probably a ton of competitors in the space, lots and lots of competitive pressure. For those types, I usually like to go far and wide because it is commoditized. They do have a choice. And so I like to communicate early and often with that group, because if it is a really highly commoditized space, there's a couple things happening here. Super competitive, and potentially the buyer is very sophisticated in how they buy. They bought the software a ton of times. If that's the case, like that's the space you're in, you're basically manufacturing cardboard boxes. It's super hard to compete. And so what I often advise customers, if they're going to do this, if they're going to make pricing changes in those spaces, is maybe niche down on your best customers and sort of become the XYZ product for that group, and sort of just separate yourself from the rest. Sort of get out of the red ocean and find yourself a nice river to sail down is usually how I do that. But yeah, for that kind of thing, I would do early, often, and communicate the changes coming and really dig into why.
Love it. Awesome. Samantha promises us that this is her last question, and I'll hold you to
Nice.
that. Samantha, no more. You're tapped out. Joking. This is a bit off topic, so I completely understand if it's not something to address right now. We're in the process of adding webinars as a value add to for our agency. We work with healthcare practices, and we're exploring the best platforms to use. Can you share which platform you're using for this session? Is it Webinar Jam or another tool? Yeah, well, you're talking to like kind of a webinar fiend here. I do one of these live classes every week, and I've been doing it for 2 years. The one that we played around with all of them. The one that I like the most, one we're using now, which is called StreamYard. Bill, you're using something fancy on your side to do your screen thing. We can kind of do that here, but what are you using to do your fancy stuff?
This thing here? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I use a piece of software on my Mac called Ecamm Live. It's kind of built for streamers, but it is fantastic. You can do custom setups like those. You know, your screen can become a camera, and you can just switch it back and forth between cameras. Like I can switch to my iPad, which isn't there right now. It's just my other camera. So yeah, that's really helpful, I find, especially when you're in a situation where you don't want to fumble around with sharing your screen. But it's super important not to forget to share your screen when you're doing it, and like I did at the beginning of this session. But yes, that's what I use, Ecamm Live.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. And you can do with StreamYard, it lets you do it. I don't know. We don't have anything sharing right now, so I can't really show you, but whoops, I got rid of you on accident. It'll like make you little, and you'll be able to see the slides that you're sharing. So something to look into. Again, I love doing the webinars, live classes. I call them live classes because that webinar sounds super salesy to me, and we don't do like hard pitches here. So anyway, it looks great. Okay, yeah, thank you, Samantha. I'm glad you like it. Okay, 2 more things before I let y'all go, and then any more questions, please let me know. The first thing is Bill has offered to do 3, what do you call them, pricing teardowns?
Pricing strategy review.
Strategy reviews. He's offered to do 3 of them, which you should. I don't know if they're already booked up, but if I would go and apply for that, because that's super valuable. Whenever I have a pricing question, Bill's the guy I think of. So that's the first thing here. So make sure you do that. I just put the link there for you. The next thing I'm going to give you is the survey. If you haven't done the survey yet, my dream is to get 100% of the attendees to fill out a survey. Has yet to happen. I once got 2% of people to do the survey. Did that spark joy? Yes, but it wasn't 100%. This could be the day. So if you have not done the survey, please, it helps me a ton, and it lets me keep doing this and figuring out what the best way to deliver this kind of content to you guys is. Really appreciate that. I don't see any more questions here. Bill, any final words of wisdom as we close out?
Yeah, I know it can be a tough topic, but the thing that I would want to leave you with, I guess, is that there are some classic things that companies think are going to happen if they change their prices. I just want to, and that biggest one is churn. And I just want to address this. In all of the pricing work I've ever done, churn has almost never moved. Like it's not actually impacted that much. Now, there might be some in very specific segments that might churn out, but churn is not the reason not to do a price increase. It generally is much worse than you in your head than it actually is. And I've proven this out over and over and over again. So I would just leave you with that. If churn is the reason that you're not messing with your existing customers, don't let that be the reason. Now, and also I guess I'll leave you with this, is that if you do have really, really old customers sitting on really, really old pricing, this is the hell you've created yourself, but you need to dig into it and start baby steps trying to get people moving forward. A quick example, worked with a company recently that's been around for multiple generations, started off way back, and it's a family-owned business, but they sell to a lot of government, and they also sell to a lot of private enterprise. But they used to sell like an on-premise service, and then they switched to per user, and then they switched to per widget. And the problem was that they started selling both the per user and the per widget. So when they moved to a new model, they kept selling both. And what ended up happening is that people would naturally just pick whatever one was cheaper for them. And this is the case of that double value metric thing we're talking about. It's like, well, I have 55,000 widgets, and if I pay per widget, it's going to be really expensive, but I only have 3 users, so I'm just going to pay per user, right? So that doesn't jive. So, but we worked with them, and we managed to, even with those old customers, we managed to increase their revenue this year by about 30%. And we took some customers that were on really, really old pricing, 5x'd their pricing, and they stayed. Now, it was handled very well, like on their end. Their customer success team is stellar, but they had to have that conversation with them about, hey, your pricing hasn't changed in 11 years, and this is where we're going. And so they tried to move them forward. Now, even with a 5x price increase, they are nowhere near the list price they should be at. So over the next 3 to 5 years, they're going to be moving them over. And I know that seems like a long time horizon, but hey, we're building these things for scale. So get into it, get your existing customers moving. If it's been more than a couple of years since you changed your pricing, now is the time.
Awesome. Real quick, I have a story that I want to share about raising prices. Before I do, Ramesh, I had a follow-up question because I want to answer your question after the story. I have a question more about sales, about ABM, and how do we think about handing over from marketing to sales in an ABM, ABS world. Can you just tell me a little bit more what you mean by handing over? Do you mean like, hey, we have inbound leads coming through and marketing needs to hand those over to sales? And since we're doing more account-based, we have different people opting in of different titles from the same account, and we want to make sure there's a smooth transition. Like, just give me a little bit more detail there. Quick story on price increases. I was working with a client when I first started my company. They were one of my first customers. It was like 4 or 5 years ago. And they had really struggled raising money. This was a venture-backed company. They really struggled raising money. And he was going to all these different VCs, and they kept saying the same thing. You charge $15 a month per user, and you're a niche SaaS. So we're not going to make all that much money. So he got so frustrated and finally just asked, like, well, what would the price have to be? And they were like, look, if you're charging $45 per user and you were showing that people are willing to pay that, we would feel much more confident about this. And this is a much larger opportunity. He goes, okay. So he 3X his price, didn't grandfather anybody in, and was just like, it is now 3 times more expensive. His churn that he had was very small and was all of like the single owner operator firms that they were working with. So not really high value customer for them. Everyone else basically stayed, and they 3x'd their ARR literally overnight. Like, they pushed a button, told everybody. They did not follow a great communication plan like you're recommending, and they still didn't have a big churn problem. So something to think about, folks, is sometimes you can just raise the price and you'll watch your revenue increase, and you're not going to lose nearly as many customers as you think you would. All right, cool. So Ramesh, you added some here, some more context. Great. We are kicking off ABM beginning January on 100 top accounts, and we will do email marketing, ads, and some other ways of touching 100 companies. How do we move conversations, email clicks, and salespeople prospecting to those on LinkedIn and phone calls? Okay, cool. Generally, really what the question is how do sales and marketing work together when they're targeting a small list of really high value target accounts to actually convert opportunities? Really, it comes down to marketing's ability to notify sales when activity has happened within one of those accounts. You're running ads, you have organic, I'm sure there's some organic approach there too, maybe a few other things. Anytime there's a trigger event, it could be someone of any title downloading a resource on your website, filling out a form that they saw in an advertising, whatever it is, you got to notify the sales rep, and the sales rep uses that trigger event to do more direct outreach. Simultaneously, they're going to be doing direct outreach anyway. You have 100 ABM target accounts. Great. We're doing direct outreach across all titles that we can, trying to learn as much as we can as salespeople to build a business case to then keep moving up, to the ladder. Side note, I always start top down in these kind of scenarios. And if we get, we have challenges going up to the top, then we go one peg down. So like CEO or the leader of the department that you're selling into, the people who report to them, or people that report to them. On the marketing side, they're just going wide, trying to get as many users or trying to get as many employees as possible at the company to do actions, and they're notifying sales of those actions. So that's how you work together on that. Marketing's responsibility is to drum up trigger events that sales can use to do the direct outreach. Cool. Anything to add there, Bill? No? Cool. All righty. Well, that was it. All of the questions have been answered. Thank you so much. There's a lot you can be doing on a Thursday. You chose to spend time with Bill and I. Thanks so much. And if you have any other questions, never hesitate to reach out. We'll talk soon.
Thanks. See you later.